Start the meeting. Okay, welcome to the Equality Garden Club for our monthly meeting. I hope you enjoy yourself. I hope you're all well settled in comfortably, and we're going to be around for the next hour or so. We're going to be discussing, today's discussion is going to be on aquatic plants that have infiltrated into Florida, and I'm sure you're going to find that extremely interesting. Throughout the meeting, we are recording the meeting, and we're archiving it onto our website. So you will be able to review the presentation by going to equalitygardenclub.com. You don't have to take your notes because you can retrieve them if you want. And I just wanted you to know that in advance. During the meeting, I'd like you to please keep your audio on mute and keep your video cameras off. This is to enable everybody to listen without interruption. If you happen to experience a short time lag between things, it's not you, it's probably us, who knows. Just be patient and we'll be right with you and we'll get you reconnected, I'm sure. If you're coming through on Facebook Live, you can post your questions as a comment on the video. Otherwise, and also we ask you that you please share that video so others can join in as well. If you're coming in on the Zoom platform, you can post questions and comments in the chat, which is at the bottom of your screen. If you get disconnected at any time, don't freak. You can reconnect just by rejoining us by signing back as you did originally, okay? Now, you'll have to bear with me. I have a few items that I have to address with our members here. I'm sure you'll all find it fascinating. But these are housekeeping things we have to do, right? First, I'd like to inform everybody here that the board has updated our bylaws, and we believe that the amended bylaws will be better serve our members by reflecting on today's new realities and the new technologies that we have available to us. Tonight, I am not going into the details. You can breathe a sigh of relief there. But tomorrow, we will be sending out an email to all the registered members of the EGC with those details. Now, true to our commitment to keep members fully informed, the original bylaws, as well as the proposed amendments, will be attached to that email, and there will be a guide which highlights the changes that have been made. So you can easily navigate between the two if you want to do a real hard study. Excuse me. Members, please do not dismiss this email. We really need your vote. We're asking all the members to respond, either yes or no. If you don't agree with it, say so. We have no problems. We want to know your position. But I'm asking you to please respond to this email when you get it. Now, on to something more charitable and much nicer. It's great news, as a matter of fact. Over the past year, EGC has helped furnish the Wilton Manors Elementary and the Atrium Butterfly Garden and the Green Initiative. And we have persuaded and assisted Wilton Manors and Oakland Park to forgo the use of pesticides in their parks where we play and we walk our pets. EGC is now formally a member of Beyond Pesticides in support of that initiative. Most recently, indeed in the last week or so, the membership has approved our participation in the Million Orchid Project, which is in conjunction with the Fairchild Gardens down in Miami and the Fort Lauderdale Orchid Society. We have now committed to ourselves to installing 1,000 orchids in our two cities here next spring. In the last few weeks, we have been encouraged by the personal generosity of our own members. Michael Prendergast donated $1,000 in support of our two projects. He has asked us to go and donate $500 to the Green Initiative and $500 to the Million Orchid Project. I can't express how pleased and happy and proud I am of being a friend of Michael's. I mean, he's done so well. Chuck Nichols and Mario Rios have also donated each $200 towards the Million Orchid Project. It's times like this when we really miss our regular meetings so that we could be thanking these people in person. I look forward to that time when we will once again be able to gather together and to celebrate one another. These contributions are going to provide a great start for these projects. On behalf of the EGC, I offer a million thanks to them. I really appreciate this. Michael, Mario, and Chuck hope that their donations are going to encourage others to join with them to improve and beautify our environment. If you can, please join them in support of these projects. These are good projects. Well, I'm very proud of them. You had enough of the announcements. Let's get on to the show, all right? I'm now going to join you and listen to our guest speaker about very, very interesting subject. I'll see you at the end of the meeting. In the meantime, here's Carl, who's going to introduce this evening's presentation.
Thank you, Van. Members and guests, tonight we are thrilled to have Ms. Kelli Gladding with us, speaking on aquatic invasive plants in South Florida. Kelli Gladding is a graduate from Rollins College with a bachelor's degree in environmental science. Kelli currently works with the University of Florida in their Center for Aquatic Invasive Plants as a research biologist. Kelli serves as the co-host for the East Central Co-op Invasive Species Management Area and served on the board of directors as well as past president for the Florida Aquatic Plant Management Society. In the past, she has worked for SePRO and the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. Kelli enjoys the outdoors, and conservation of our natural native environment is her passion. She is a mother of two that keeps her busy with soccer, kayaking, swimming, singing, and writing. And when she's not busy with her kids, she spends time in the garden, fishing, and boating. The topic again tonight is aquatic invasive plants of South Florida. Aquatic invasive plants have long plagued Florida's waterways, starting in the late 1800s with the introduction of the water hyacinth. They were introduced because of their beautiful flowers and ability to grow easily. Tonight's presentation will review aquatic plant identification of invasive species, along with native plant lookalikes, as well as discuss integrated pest management strategies currently in use and how we, as citizen scientists, can keep our waterways healthy. Do remember, as Fan has stated, we are accepting your questions through Facebook and through Zoom. We will collect those through the presentation, and I will present those to Kelli at the end. With that, I am pleased to introduce to you Ms. Kelli Gladding.
All right. Well, thank you guys very much for having me this evening. I appreciate it. And definitely, it's a different world that we're living in, having to do this, again, digitally. I certainly prefer having to do face-to-face meetings and bring plants with me so we can all touch them and learn a little bit together in the same room. But we are all in the same boat working through this. So again, tonight I'm here to talk about aquatic invasive plants, and I tried to really focus in on South Florida and some of the plant species that you guys deal with. Again, I've had a great introduction. Thank you, Carl. I am an aquatic plant biologist, and I spend a lot of time on a boat. And certainly since COVID, you can see we spend a lot of time alone on the boats. And again, you know, my two passions are also my children. Tyler is my oldest, and he's 12, and Lauren is my youngest, she's 9, and they just started school digitally, so that's been a whole new learning process for us too. Again, thank you to EGC, and I did listen in last month to your meeting, and you guys have a 10-year anniversary coming up, so I think that is huge, and you guys should be very proud of that, and especially all the accomplishments that you guys have had over the past 10 years and everything that's coming up, especially with your orchid project. So definitely some great things going on. And then in just trying to keep in the theme of orchids, you guys, had a great presentation last month, I apologize. And one thing that I kind of hone in on, being an invasive plant biologist was, Mac had some great pictures and showed us around even with the technical difficulties. But one thing that he had said was he had an orchid that grew 20 feet in less than 2 years. It was easy to grow, no fertilizer, and no work was necessary. So for me, being an invasive plant person, we'll talk more about this, is that kind of hits all those like, uh-oh, what are we looking at kind of buttons. So, you know, there's a lot of great natives, and I applaud you guys for all the work that you do. And this one came across my desk not that long ago, and I would assume that some of you guys are very familiar with this one. If not, then maybe we should be. But this is a Chinese crown orchid. It's not an aquatic one, so it's not one that is my specialty, so I had to do some research on this one. But no, I would certainly be looking out for it. And if you guys have it in your landscapes and in the parks and the areas that you guys have these wonderful projects, I would certainly be on the lookout and try to remove them as soon as you can if you do find them. So going back to tonight with our agenda, just a few objectives. I tried to kind of list it out so we have an order of how things are going to go this evening. But really, you know, what is an invasive plant? You know, what is an invasive species? We'll also talk a little bit about a short history about aquatic invasive plants in Florida, and particularly plant invaders in South Florida, and some of the native lookalikes. So there's a lot of good natives and then nuisance natives, and what those definitions are, along with integrated pest management strategies and best management practices. And then again, you know, what you all can do as citizen scientists that live in our waterways. We all play a part in keeping that healthy. So this looks like a really busy slide because it sort of is. But, you know, water hyacinth was the original bad player, especially in Florida in the United States. So back in 1884, it was introduced through the World's Fair in Louisiana. They actually gave plants to people as like a welcoming gift and a parting gift to take back home. And that's exactly what happened. So it grew so well in the state. There was a pond near the St. Johns River, and he had his own garden, and it grew so well, and the flowers are so beautiful. He thought, well, I'm just going to share it with everybody. And whenever he had excess plants, he put them into the St. Johns River. So a short 12 years later, they had spread throughout the river. And then in 1899, the federal government became involved because it was hindering all boat access. You know, there was no way to get from one end to the other of the St. John's, which is a major thoroughfare for transporting of products. So they said, okay, we have the Rivers and Harbors Act, and we want to remove and contain these plants. So how do we do that? So in 1902, they had the first crusher boat. So this goes back to mechanical removal back in the early 1900s. And then at that point, it was not keeping up with the amount of plants and the growth. So they amended that to say extermination, removal by mechanical, chemical, or any other means. And this is where a lot has certainly changed, but we also did some things that we weren't quite so good at. So they did everything from trying to pour diesel fuel on these plants and lighting them on fire, to arsenic, which didn't work out so well for the farmers because the cows like to lick the arsenic off the plants. So there was a lot learned in that short time frame. But then in about 1922, the areas around Okeechobee and in South Florida really started seeing the spread of water hyacinths. Again, in about 1939, there were hyacinth traps and destroyer boats. So you can see some of the older pictures and some of the historical aspects on those. On the Army Corps of Engineers website, they have a really good historical chronological view. And then in 1947, 2,4-D was successful in controlling water hyacinths. And this was key. If they had not found that, there's no telling where we'd be today. And then another big point is in 1960, it was the Army Corps of Engineers, along with the state of Florida, Fish and Game and Wildlife, came to the table and they said, okay, you know, this is a big problem. We're getting more plants, you know, things are coming in. So they started doing a cost share, and both of them started working jointly to control these plants. And then in 1970, our lead agency in Florida was the Department of Natural Resources, which then turned over to Department of Environmental Protection. And then the Aquatic Plant Control Program is now under Florida Fish and Wildlife again. So, you know, there's no stopping these plants, and we have new ones that come in every day. And it's not that new plants coming in are all bad or are going to be bad players. You know, there's a lot of ornamental plants that we love to grow that play well. You know, they stay in the yard, they don't take over. So I think that's, you know, very important, in the ornamental industry is vital, especially here in Florida. So what is an invasive species? So this is defined as a species that is not native to a specific geographical region. It was introduced by humans, intentionally or unintentionally, and does or can cause environmental or economic harm or harm to humans. So this is just a photo here of, actually it took probably just about 2 weeks ago, full of water lettuce and water hyacinth. And we also should define, you know, what is a nuisance species. So a nuisance species is an individual or group of plants or species that cause management issues or property damage, presents a threat to public safety, or just an annoyance, and can apply to both native and non-native species. Okay, so that's a big difference. When we talk about invasive species, that really means non-native species that are causing harm. Now, we do have nuisance species that can be native species as well. So I'm just going to highlight a few plant management regulations. You know, starting with the federal government, you have the USDA, and they have a list of plant species that are not allowed to be moved, cultivated, or transported. The the Army Corps of Engineers has their own invasive species management branch, some really good website information. And then here in the state of Florida, we also have the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, and they have their own list of noxious plant species that cannot be moved, transported, or cultivated, which is really good and interesting. It's something that you guys should be aware of. And then really the key management, especially in aquatic plants and on our public water bodies, is the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, their Invasive Plant Management Section. They have their information there. And so they are responsible for managing in all the public water bodies, permitting of aquatic plant management, which means removal of potentially non-natives, but there's a balance because we have to keep native plants too, to maintain a healthy water body. And they also do permitting of triploid grass carp stocking. There are all other many water management districts and local municipalities, which some of you guys are already working with. So that's great to see. So this is a relevant picture that I thought you guys would maybe, does anybody, see this is where I have it's hard to interact with the audience when I can't see you guys, but so this is Lake Osborne in Palm Beach County, and this is a public water body that's managed by FWC. And I took this picture, I think this past spring. And when a water body gets to this level and you have that much vegetation and that much biomass in there, it's very difficult to even utilize the resource itself. So you can't launch a boat, can't really go fishing, you can't jet ski. You know, very few people want to go swimming and have that mess tangled around their legs. So there's a really good balance between, you know, let's go ahead and manage for the non-native invasive plants, and then we can nurture our native plants to grow and to occupy that space. So now we're going to go into some weed identification, submerged plants. This is a long list, so I'll try and go through it fairly quickly, but these are ones that you'd most typically find in South Florida. And I'll go to the first one here. This is Bacopa caroliniana. And what I want you to notice for these slides, I did try to tag them as being native or exotic or non-native. And, you know, these are great plant species to have, but a lot of these, and I'll show you another picture here in a minute, you know, when this is fall into that nuisance category in some cases. But this is a common fresh and brackish water species. We have 3 of them in Florida. This is one most distinguishable by when crushing the leaves. It has a very lemony smell to it. It's very fragrant. Sometimes if you drive into a marshy area and it's growing across, you can really smell it. And it's very, very pretty, very succulent, small plant. There's another species, Bacopa minerii. This is a smooth water hyssop. Looks very similar to the other Bacopa. And this has white flowers, though, right here, and very succulent and small. But, you know, this is, you know, some of the management aspects that are very real, especially in South Florida, because everything is certainly plumbed to move water. And so this was completely covered over by that lemon Bacopa through here. And the water management district has to be able to move water. So they did do a treatment in here, and you can see how, you know, just that one application really helped open up that area. Hygrophila polysperma. This is East Indian Hygrophila. This is a really bad player, especially in South Florida. You'll find this in the canal areas, and it really likes that moving water and strains, and it'll break off, and each fragment that breaks off of that will sprout new roots and grow a new plant. So, you know, trying to physically remove a plant species such as this makes it very challenging, because you probably make the problem worse downstream. Some easy ways to identify the species. It actually has a square stem. So when you hold it and you twist it in your fingers, it's not round like some of our other plants. You can feel it square in your fingers. And opposite leaves. And it has a bluish white flower. It's very delicate and has like these 2 little lips. So this is a Hygrophila infestation in a pond, and then that is later. So now it's, you know, open and usable, and the neighborhood can actually access that pond now. Rotella rotundifolia. This is a dwarf rotella or round leaf toothcup. This is a really bad player, and one that you guys should be on the lookout for. It is very diverse on how it can grow. It changes its morphology as a plant that grows completely submerged under the water on a single stalk, and the leaves are whorled, and it's around like a pink stem. So you can see that pink stem here. And then, you know, the emergent plant is very fleshy. So as it comes up, you can see how it gives that tooth cup look to it. And again, like I said, it's very fleshy. And the flowers are spike-shaped emergent plant, bright pink fuchsia in color. It's actually very, very pretty. The biggest problem with this plant is that any parts of this plant can grow. So it hasn't been in Florida very long. And so when they discovered it, they tried all sorts of management options on it. And one of them was to actually just scoop it all out of the canal, pile it up on the edge, and then just let it go. Well, this can actually grow on the banks, grows under the water, on the water, and above the water. So whenever they piled it up, the plant actually grew on top of itself. So it's a bad player. So it's something that we're on the lookout for and trying to keep maintained. So this is baby tears. Looks very small, and it is. That's why it's called baby tears. It's usually very creeping, totally immersed, small, light green in color. And the flowers are very tiny and purplish, pretty hard to find. And then we have another native species, Micranthemum glomeratum. Again, this is still going to be very small, but this particular one doesn't have quite as many, it doesn't grow as dense as the other species. So this one kind of grows nice in the water column, doesn't cause too many issues. This is in a pond situation where you can see the baby tears growing all along that edge. And that's pretty common with this species. In natural systems, we normally just leave it alone. It is a native plant, so it's not something that's managed on a regular basis. Cara is a macroalgae species, so it has no true leaves because it is an algae. It's branched, made of single column shaped cells, and they're very spiny when you touch it, but the easiest way to identify this one is when you crunch those leaves, it puts off a wicked musky, like garlic smell to it. It likes to grow at the ends of canals and build up on top of itself. That's usually when people are like, what is that smell? And a lot of times it is Cara. Nitella is another great native stonewort. It will grow pretty much on the bottom of the water bodies. There's two species that we have. There's a large Nitella and one that we call a snot Nitella. And snotty because when you touch it with the algae species, you know, you can kind of feel it slimy. But yeah, so. Next up is coontail. This is a great native plant and very common. You probably might recognize this from seeing it in a bunch of the canal systems. It's free floating, has no roots, very feathery. It grows in whorls around the main stem right here. Flowers are almost, you know, they're tiny, very rarely seen. And again, this is a great native plant and it floats around and, you know, just wonderful to have in the systems. Kabamba is a native plant species, but in a lot of areas and canal systems, it can become a nuisance. Still, again, not something that is managed on any kind of routine basis, but it has you know, a submersed portion of the plant, and the easiest way to identify this species is it has a branch on each side. So it branches and then it whorls. So you have two branches on each side, and then that's the submersed portion of the plant. And then when it reaches that surface, it changes and it has these floating little diamond shaped. And then the flower on the stalk is white, and that's pretty easy to discern which species that is. Limnophila. Limnophila is not native, and this can become a bad player in many situations. But it is, you know, can grow very long, and it again is rooted, and you can see how it comes up the stem. And this is completely whorled around that stem. And then again, the morphology of it changes as it gets to that surface. And then you have that emergent portion up here where you'll have the flower, which is like a blue-violet color, which you can see right here in that picture. Myriophyllum heterophyllum. This is a native species. We have several Myriophyllum species, so I'm not going to touch on all of them. But Myriophyllum heterophyllum I've seen down in South Florida on those water bodies. And so again, it grows completely submersed, and it has kind of that pink stem, and it whirls around the tip. And then as it comes out of the water, that's where, you know, it changes to that emergent bright green linear with a whirl around the stem. Parrot feather, this I'm certain you guys have seen in the ditches. So this is a very common non-native species. It can become invasive in some areas, but it's pretty much prevalent at this point. It can be up to 5 feet long. It can trail around the water surface. It's very fluffy, and you can touch it and feel how it's whirled around the edges. Naiad guadalupensis, southern naiad. This is a great native plant species to have. It does grow submersed completely, very slender, and can be quite branched. And it also has little teeth on the leaf margin, if you guys can see that. Great native. And then pondweed. And native pondweeds, all of them are native except for a curly leaf pondweed, which is mostly up in the northern states. And we've only had a couple of cases of it, reportings of it here in Florida. But most anything else you're gonna find in the pondweed family is gonna be native. So floating leaves are here on the surface. Submerged leaves, you know, sometimes this can become a nuisance for boaters whenever it grows really, really dense. Agaricus densa. Now this isn't nearly as common, but I throw this out here because I'm gonna compare it to our worst aquatic invasive here in just a minute. But it is rooted and it's kind of soft to the touch. So you don't have you have the sawtooth leaf margins around the edge, but on the underside of the leaf, there's no teeth. And hydrilla. So you can see how these two species look extremely similar, right? So whenever hydrilla was introduced into the late 50s and early 60s, it was misidentified for being Agaricus originally, until they finally got the correct name for hydrilla as Hydrilla verticillata. And here you can see that teeth right underneath that leaf margin. And hydrilla's got to be the world's most expensive weed. It is rooted. It grows under the water surface. It flowers in Florida, and we only have the female versions. It's a dioecious form. It creates tubers and turions all year long. If a piece of this plant breaks off and it floats downstream, you have new plants that will grow from that vegetated portion. And it's very important, you know, when people are leaving the boat ramp to make sure that they're not transporting this to another lake. And that's pretty much how it spread throughout Florida. It was originally introduced through the aquarium industry. And a lot of people, you know, they're done with their fish or something happens and they want to go ahead and let, you know, guppy go. And a lot of different plant species that we have been accidental releases, intentional or not. So this is an infestation over on North Lake Toho. And this is just from this past spring. So it is, you know, still something that we struggle with. And this is a satellite image showing this infestation. So this is kind of your emergent shoreline cattail plant species. All of this is hydrilla on the surface. And so, you know, you can imagine trying to boat through those plant species or utilize that. This really outcompetes our native plants. It causes oxygen demands on the system. And it's, like I said, probably the world's worst weed and the most expensive one to manage. There was a study that was done. Originally, we used to say this grew like 4 to 7 inches a day. And then they said, well, let's see how much this plant can really grow. So without any competition, you know, fertilizer, perfect growing conditions, this plant it grew 194 inches a day. So what people don't realize is it grows up on a stem, but once it gets to a point, it branches off that stem everywhere and grows laterally. So they measured each of the stems as it broke off and added all that up. And so this is a impressive plant, and not in a good way, sorry. Bladderwort species. This is our native bladderwort species. I think all of our bladderwort species are going to be native. They are rootless and they're floating and they're carnivorous plants, which I think a lot of people don't realize. But they have little bladders that help them float, and they're good to have. They bloom densely at different times of the year. This is probably one of the most common ones. This is a flat stem bladderwort. So when you actually touch this species, you can feel it. It's actually kind of slimy to the touch, but very pretty. And this is Utricularia purpurea. And this has, those really pretty lavender flowers that you can see here. And eelgrass. This is a a wonderful native species to have. And that's what we really manage for, is to keep our native plants growing. And it has dark green tape-like. A lot of people call this tape grass, eelgrass. There are, saltwater species that look similar to this. If you guys spend time out in the lagoon areas, you'll see other species of this, but not particularly Vallisneria. Vallisneria is a truly freshwater species. So we'll move on to some emergent and floating plants. This is American lotus, Nelumbo lutea. This is very tall, especially this time of year. So if you guys are crossing a marsh area or something, and you see those big bright yellow flowers, that's definitely American lotus. And it has really thick pads, and they can get really, really big. And they also have the seed pods, are what are used. They're harvested during, around Thanksgiving time, because they're great for ornamental bouquets and such. Spatterdock, this is also called cow lily, and it can grow fairly dense under the right conditions. And this is a baby spatterdock here. And again, just that cow lily has that very yellow look to it. The leaf margin is a little bit rippled, and then you can see how it comes in and it connects to that stem. That's going to be a little bit different than the fragrant water lily. So fragrant water lily stays completely flat on that water surface, and it has kind of a Pac-Man cut out. So that's kind of a good way to identify the difference between the spatterdock and the fragrant water lily. And again, this has the typical really pretty white flowers and does have a nice sweet smell to it. Now nymphoides, these are the banana lilies, and this is a floating heart. This is our native plant species. So I just want to spend a few minutes on these species because it's going to be important here on the next slide. This is our native plant species, and it's very coriaceous on the underside. And when it has the seeds, they literally look like bananas clusters at the bottom. Versus our crested floating heart, Nymphoides cristata. And this has really invaded our waterways down in South Florida. Seriously invasive plant species. If you cut any part of this leaf on that plant and let it sit in water, it will grow new leaves and develop a brand new plant. And also it creates and develops these ramets, essentially daughter plants. So it will take these and send them off, and then that way they can float downstream, get caught up somewhere else, and start a new plant species. And even trying to use herbicides on this plant, this is a rhizome that was buried under the ground, and that you can see how long that is and how thick it is. And trying to control all the starch in that plant before it stops sending up new plants is a management challenge. And even trying to pull those out, because if you let any of those plants go, then it could potentially create a new plant infestation. Yellow floating heart, this is Nymphoides peltata. It's been documented in Florida. It's just not as routine and something to be on the lookout for. So obviously the flowers are very bright and yellow and showy, and it's much larger than our native Nymphoides as well. Mosquito fern, this is our native, Azolla folliculoides, and there are 6 species worldwide, and this is the smallest free-floating fern in the world. Most of the young plants, whenever they're growing, they're green, but later on in the summer, whenever they do get kind of stressed from the heat and everything else, they exhibit this bright red color, which is really impressive to see on large scale, but it's kind of a seasonal aspect with it. Now the biggest difference between the Azolla that I just showed you, our native, and Azolla pinnata, this is a mosquito fern as well, but this is not native and it's extremely aggressive. This is on the federal noxious weed list and something you guys should be looking for in the canal systems. It's easy to tell the difference in the sense that it's shaped like a Christmas tree, right? And so you can see how big this is versus our native Azolla over here. It has, you know, modified roots for buoyancy. It hangs to trees and other plants. So it's hard to find as a small plant until it becomes a bigger issue. Salvinia minima, this is not native, but it's something that we've lived with long enough that we're not going to be able to, you know, eradicate this species at all. And it, you know, floats around in pretty much every water body that we have. But I do want to point out that this Azolla minima, on the top of that leaf, you almost need to use a hand lens. So this is where, you know, I really kind of geek out on plants. But if you use a hand lens and you look at the hairs on the top of that leaf surface, they are open right here. You can see that's very easy to see if you have a hand lens, versus our giant Salvinia molesta. This is something that we are aggressively looking for and you know, trying to manage to keep this plant species out. Our other southern states, such as Louisiana, have big problems with this plant species. So we want to make sure we try and keep it out as much and as long as possible. And you can tell the difference on this one, where on the top, these looks like an egg beater, and these are actually closed, whereas the minima, they were open. So that's how you can tell the difference between those two. Frogspit, Limnobium spongia. This is our native floating plant, and it can create dense mats as well and crowd out other species. You can see here as a small plant, they call it Limnobium spongia, because if you turn that leaf over, there's like these little spongy things you can feel and kind of squish on the bottom of it. Versus water hyacinth. So this is the bad player and really where aquatic plant management took off, as I mentioned earlier at the start of this. Absolutely beautiful plant. So you can imagine why, you know, they were wanting to share it with their friends and everybody else. You know, why keep this to myself? There are other, you know, varieties of the water hyacinth. That's an all solid white one. And it, you know, you can see the bulbils down here, and it creates, you know, these daughter plants, and they spread out and they snake out. So as a boat trying to go through it, it's almost impossible because of the way the plants are connected to each other. And we tried to, you know, they tried to remove them mechanically. And we do that today as well as part of our management tools. But on the average, 1 acre, just 1 acre of floating plants can weigh nearly 200 tons as wet plants. So that's a lot of work and a lot of effort on the machinery to pull those plants out. They're about 95% water. So, you know, if you could dry them out, you know, you're dealing with only about 5 tons of material. But it's extremely dense and a lot of work. Now to look at the difference, if you didn't have a flower to look at between the frogspit and the water hyacinth, they grow right next to each other. So you do have to stop and take a look. So here's kind of the similar pictures, but here you can see the veins, and this is the frogspit. And then the water hyacinth is going to be completely smooth around that edge. And then if you can also look at the stems, so this stem is a little bit more hard and kind of squarish, versus the hyacinth is definitely going to be rounded and spongy. Water lettuce, I will point out, native, not native, depending on which botanist you're talking with, and you know, it's been debated. But from a management perspective, you know, when you're looking at an area that is a monoculture, be it native or not native, you know, that's a nuisance plant that does need to be managed. So that way, you know, it's not, we can keep the diversity. You know, a monoculture of one thing isn't good. And we know that diversity is where everything is. And always be on the lookout. This is kind of a little takeaway message. So this is a new species for me. I observed in April of this year in Lake Toho, And that was all the way in Osceola County, where it hasn't even been documented before. And typically our plants in Florida that are natives aren't real showy in color. So this kind of stuck out like a sore thumb to me with this bright pink. I was like, that doesn't look right. So it's good to get on these plants, that if you can find them early and to prevent the problem in the long run. So now I'll switch gears a little bit and talk about aquatic plant management, and tools that are in the toolbox. We always talk about that. So a little bit of mechanical control. And this is a harvester working out on Lake Toho. And they can be used for multiple applications. So they can be used, they're using this to cut hydrilla out of underneath the water. And then we also have areas where they're doing mechanical harvesting on floating plants and on tussocks. There's also another machine, it's called a cookie cutter. It's essentially a shredder. So if you're going into an area and there's just a lot of plant species and you can't get through it and it's a tussock, sometimes it's easier to just kind of chew up those plants and let them sink there so you can gain access quickly. Drawdowns and physical removal. This is a project that just happened this past year over on East Lake Toho. And this is very expensive and very challenging to try and create drawdowns, but it is something that is utilized as a management tool. And prescribed burning. That's used quite often whenever the conditions are right, of course, especially out on Lake Okeechobee. And here you can see they were burning, cattails, which can be a nuisance in many areas, depending because of how dense the plants can grow. And here you can see it looks like it was probably either after winter or else it was treated with an herbicide, and then they went through to burn off the thatch. So that way it allows the native grasses and other plant species to come in. Biological control. This is a great one to talk about. I started with the air potato beetle here in the corner because you guys probably see this down there. And it is very showy, kind of a pretty bug. And it has decimated air potato. I was just talking with my son the other day when I was putting this presentation together, and he was like, I remember we used to go out and collect air potatoes. And I said, yeah, we did. He's like, why don't we do that anymore? I said, because of these little guys. And he was like, well, I want to go collect some more. So growing up in my household is probably a little bit different than most kids. So here's an alligator flea beetle. And this is probably the poster child for the aquatics world at this point. So alligator weed was a huge issue, and it still is in northern states. So the flea beetle doesn't do well with real cool, cold weather. So in the northern states, this beetle will die for the winter. And so we have a project, or the Army Corps of Engineers, they will actually go out onto our waterways and scoop up beetles and put them into jars and send them north to help with their plant species. But this little guy has helped us so much that we don't worry about controlling alligator weed anymore. It's done well in our environment. And this is just some weevils that they were releasing for water hyacinth control. And then good old grass carp. So we see these a lot in our ponds and some of our lakes, but it is for controlling hydrilla. So after you do a treatment or any kind of submerged plants, it's used a lot in the private industry as well. Herbicide and herbicide applications. I know you guys talked a little bit about pesticide and your green initiatives, and love it. That is absolutely wonderful. If we could get away from it, that would be outstanding, but it is part of our toolbox and something that we utilize. And there's, we have probably a little more than a handful of aquatic herbicides. So there are a whole lot more on the upland side, but there's a bunch more qualifications and considerations when you're going to be putting something in the water. And so, and how you apply them, you know, if you're going to do a foliar application or an in-water application, depends on the plant species, the situation, and, you know, what the target is and what the natives are. So that way you can remain very selective in what you're trying to do. And with those tools, you know, you kind of talk about integrated pest management, and we utilize all of them. Everything has a tool that's necessary. And, you know, I think, I'm not going to read the definition for you, but, you know, it's, you know, you don't want to use a hammer to, you know, when you need a screwdriver. So we keep all that stuff into mind. So moving on to what you guys can do to help. There is a lot of great information, and I hope you guys can write some of this down. I know this is being recorded, so maybe you guys can go back and look at it again later. But on your phones, there's the I've Got One app. Really easy. You can download it, and so that way if you're out walking and you're riding around and you think you found Salvinia molesta, you can use your phone. It'll take a GPS coordinate. You can tell them, you know, describe what the plant species is, and it'll go into a database. And then that's where it gets reviewed by the SISMA group, which I'll talk here in a minute. Oh, also associated with something online and having in your pocket is this FLIP app. This is brand new. So this is the Florida Invasive Plant Species Mobile Field Guide. So you can, you know, browse by plant species and look at it and filter through, which I thought was really interesting. Like I said, this is a new one for me. And going back to your local SISMA, so Florida Invasive Species, there's one near you. So you guys can, you know, choose which SISMA. They have mailing groups. They have webinars once a month. So that way you can stay up to date on current invasive plant species or management practices. And that's really, these were designed to help bridge the gap between landowners, you know, public lands, what people are doing privately. And because, you know, when you're talking about plants, they don't stop at the fence line. So they continue to grow beyond that. Florida Aquatic Plant Management Society. Again, this is the society I was fortunate to be president of last year. And, you know, this is really the management aspect and where the professionalism comes from. And really to share information about how to protect Florida's aquatic ecosystems. Buy and plant native species. So especially in like some of the park systems, you know, we all have plants in our ornamental gardens that we love. So, which may not be native, but those are not going to go anywhere either. But if you're going out, it's always good to try and go with native. And I found this just while I was putting my presentation together. Now this is water hyacinth. So water hyacinth is on our noxious weed list here in Florida. So they could not sell it to anybody in Florida, or at least transport it across, but it is still sold, you know, and marketed. You can go ahead and get a whole set for your pond for 20 bucks. And that's part of the problem. So that's where I feel very passionate about, you know, research and education, education outreach. So, you know, and I do my best to try and talk to the schools and get in front of the children, because, you know, they're going to be leading us one day. And, you know, making sure that we're in touch with them is great, and getting them out in the field. And, you know, with all the great projects that you guys have going on, you know, trying to see if you can incorporate some school kids to teach them about it is helpful for all of us for the future. And get involved in the process. This is extremely important. So if you live on a waterway, if you live on a public lake, there are Florida Fish and Wildlife is putting together lake management plans currently. And this is where you need to be to have your voice heard. So you don't have to be a fisherman or a waterfowl hunter or anything else. You know, if you just like to go out and watch the birds, or, you know, just enjoy being on the water the way I do. So they want to hear from you. You know, they want to know are we doing it right? You know, what do you want to see? Do you want more plants? Do you want less plants? You know, how do you want to see these things managed? And so, you know, they're really recognizing that a lot of these non-native plant species they're here to stay, and they do, you know, have some level of habitat associated with them. So, you know, what is the best way to do that? So they're really reaching out and asking for our input on stakeholders, you know, and if you're not there to give your voice, then somebody else is. So I strongly encourage you guys to get involved in that process. And then the center. So very proud of this. We have a brand new website developed. So I encourage you guys to go and peruse and look through lots of great information, plants, management plans, you know, everything that you can think of that has to do with aquatic plant management. Also encourage you guys to follow and stay up to date. There's a whole lot of social media out there. It's hard to keep involved in all of it. I struggle myself. So I kind of pick and choose which ones I can personally keep up with. But then you also have Lake Watch. So there are some of you guys that like to get out on the lakes. That is a true citizen scientist. You know, you take water samples, you send it in, you help monitor the conditions and the nutrients of the lake. If you just want to know what's going on, there's the What's Happening on My Lake through FWC. Again, the lake management plans. And then IFAS has, you know, the Master Naturalist program, which is outstanding. And I'm sure many of you on this are probably involved in that. And with that, I'll go ahead and open it up for questions.
Kelly, thank you. Just outstanding. I actually only have one question, and I believe you can answer this fairly easily. The question was, a lot of the non-native plants look very common to aquarium plants. Is that the case, or they just look that similar? And I know that in your presentation, you did say that unfortunately that's how some things are populated. People are dumping their fish and the plants in the lakes.
Yes, absolutely. So a lot of our submerged plant species are found in the aquarium industry. Even if you go to PetSmart and you're trying to find some plants to put in your aquaria, many of those may not be native plants, but you know, hydrilla is on that prohibited plant list. So most of the time, if you're in there and you're like, wow, that really looks hydrilla, most of the time that could probably be like Elodea, the other one that we looked at. But yes, definitely, certainly through the aquarium trade. That's where we get a lot of those.
Okay. Another question just came up. The comments are, it's a very unique presentation. We've thoroughly enjoyed it. One of the questions is, what happens to the water after the herbicide is entered?
So I'm thinking that question kind of goes around what happens to the herbicide once it gets into the water.
That is correct.
I'm guessing. So, okay.
Well, the effects of the water.
Yes. A lot of these herbicides, they have a very short half-life applied to the water. Well, depending on which herbicide or which kind of plant species you have, I mean, there shouldn't be any detrimental effects to the water itself. Otherwise, we would not be able to use it in aquatics. There are, like I said, there are very stringent rules and regulations for anything that goes into the water. So it's not going to alter that water at all. These are herbicides and only focused for controlling plants. They don't kill fish. You know, when everything's used within those label recommendations, truly an herbicide to control plants.
Okay, great, excellent. Kelly, I don't have any more questions. All I can tell you is thank you so much. Extremely informative. I took a lot of notes. One thing that you've done, you've given us a lot of areas to reference from, either obviously adding an app to our phone, which I captured that, but a lot of websites. What? Oh, and Kelly, I just have another question that just popped up. What's the natural sequence of controlling aggressive native plants?
You broke up on me. What was that? What was the natural?
Yeah, what's the natural sequence controlling aggressive native plants?
Oh, okay. So like natural plant, like how do they remain in
Exactly.
check?
How do you control
a lot of times
naturally?
yeah, we have a lot of natural bugs, you know, because our native plants here actually have natural predators that go along with them. So spatterdock, for instance, has a native beetle that lives its cycle on the spatterdock pad, and it will kind of defoliate it and go through a different life cycle. So we have a lot of you know, situations such as that, and then you know, then we do have some other natives that, you know, do grow more aggressively than others, and then we do, you know, management on some of those as necessary, but not all the time.
Okay, great. Thank you. I have no more questions. Thank you so very much.
You're welcome.
With that, and again, thank you again. With that, just for an announcement for next month, we will have Sherry Blissett Clark, the infamous Bat Lady, for our October Halloween presentation. She will be discussing Florida bats in our backyard. And with that, let me turn this back over to our president, Van Gosselin, for closure. Thank you.
Hello again, right? Excuse me. I'm a landlubber, and I hadn't appreciated the extent to which these plants are over there taking over our canals. So I found it very informative, actually, right? The only question I had, I didn't get the chance to ask, was I hope it's okay to go and have some of these invasive plants in our little ponds, and not dump them into the environment. I hope that's the case. I don't know if that's illegal or not. That'd be an interesting point to figure out. At any rate, I want to say good night to you, and thank you so much for attending. And I hope to see you soon. Stay happy, stay healthy, and stay safe, okay? And good night to you all.